maybe me, probably have been asked this question before, but a little bit about just Harvey's history with the Navy.
Yes.
What did he do, and how did it end up?
Harvey was an officer, so he joined the Navy after he graduated from the University of Albany, and he was a diving instructor, so he was a commissioned officer, and he served in San Diego. He served aboard the Kitty Hawk. It was a retrieval recovery vessel, and he was one day the military police kind of did a swoop in a park where known homosexuals were in San Diego. He was among them, and on his DD-214 we have about 12 pages of 2 weeks of interrogation of him on, is he gay, has he been with men, and finally they just gave him the option, look, you can either resign with a less than honorable discharge, or we can move procedures to dishonorably discharge you, and there's really no difference between the two. So he was actually forced out, and I was just commenting, it's interesting, so everything that's been put out about the ship and being the first ship named after not only an openly queer person, but the first ship named after a former military person. It's also the first ship in the world named after someone who was dishonorably discharged. Now, the Navy doesn't like to talk about it, but I think it's really important. I think it sends a very important message that as a society we progress and we make mistakes, and our institutions make mistakes. And so this ship is going to travel to many countries where it's currently illegal to be LGBTQ or societally unacceptable. And those people are given hope that here, this ship named after someone who was forced to resign from the Navy, this ship is actually celebrating that community. So there's a big difference. I'm really excited. Tomorrow we'll be joined by Speaker Emeritus Nancy Pelosi, who really is one of the biggest advocates for the LGBT community that we've ever had. She really oversaw the taking down of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy. But Don't Ask, Don't Tell just means that we're tolerating LGBTQ people. It means they can serve openly. This means we're celebrating LGBTQ people. There's a big difference between tolerance and celebration. And so that's what, to me, this ship means. It's the celebration of everybody, including people who we did not think could serve in what we consider the most honorable service that you can have in the U.S.
I don't know if perhaps you've thought about this. I don't like to make assumptions, but even with Roe v. Wade, a lot of freedoms can be fragile. Concerned at all about what the future holds?
Yes, absolutely. My uncle and I had a lot of different conversations, and when I was young, and it wasn't always about queer rights, but he really was the person that I had conversations about social justice. And and he taught me about Thomas Jefferson, who was famously asked by Francis Scott about the injustice of slavery. And Thomas Jefferson was asked, when does the battle for justice and equality end? And Thomas Jefferson, one of the founders of our country, famously said, it does not end. It requires vigilance. As long as you have minorities, they will always be subject to the tyranny of the majority. And so freedom and justice requires vigilance. And I think that that's what you have to do. I mean, you can ask any minority group anywhere in the world. Just ask, as you just mentioned, women. Not only here in the United States, but across the world. They must remain vigilant. And the fact of the matter is, women is not a minority. They're the majority of human beings on the planet, but it still requires vigilance that we work to protect ourselves against tyranny. In fact, during the last administration, the Trump administration, we honored at our gala a couple of trans activists who were serving in the military who testified before Congress. And I actually did, during the Trump administration, the keynote speech for Pentagon Pride at Ground Zero with Tammy Duckworth. And we both challenged the administration at that time attempt to roll back trans rights to serve. But I think it's important for us to know that societally, trans community is not universally marginalized. So if you go into Asian societies and Euro-Asian societies, what they call the third gender and the transgender community is celebrated and has more acceptance than the LGB community. So, you know, it's really very much a Western, in particular a Western tradition of marginalizing trans people, but it's not a Western tradition from our long-term history. When I say long-term, I think back thousands and thousands of years. So we just had at our event this amazing member of the Native American community in Florida who talked about the Two-Spirit tradition. So the Two-Spirit tradition believed that trans people had the best of both worlds, the best of both sexes. And so I think we need to go back into some of our cultural history and pull up some good that came from there, and remove some of the colonial elements that changed that good perspective towards our non-binary and trans brothers and sisters.
Means to you personally, are you excited about this? Is a big deal.
Well, I'm excited because the ship is finally out and running and moving. This will be the last time it's on the West Coast. It will be permanently based in the Atlantic coast. So I think it's great that here in San Francisco, its inaugural non-sea trial journey was from San Diego, where my uncle served in the Navy, to here in San Francisco, where he began his political life. So I think that's a beautiful poetic element of this, and so I think to me it's particularly meaningful because it in some ways represents the journey that my uncle had himself. I always get asked, usually by the press, if I'm sad that my uncle didn't get to see a day like today, where we have a ship named after him, where we have elected officials, and my answer to that question is always the same. I'm not sad that he didn't get to see this day, because what gave him the courage to go into, now don't forget, he ran for office, he was elected to office, and he was told time and time again, look, cool it on asking other people to come out. And he just was persistent on, we must be visible. If we're not visible, we're going to, the lies and myths and innuendos about us will be enriched and sustained. So we must be visible. So I'm always asked if I'm sad that Harvey didn't get to see a day like today, or a day, like what we have in 2024, where we have literally thousands of openly queer people elected to public office around the world. And my answer is always the same. I'm not sad because he actually did see this day, because he dreamed of it. That's what gave him the courage to face those bullets.
Considered to be immoral. What's wrong with a man being an alcoholic?
Wait a minute. We're just talking about morals, and you're lumping together different groups of people. Are you talking about what Christ said is moral?
No, I'm talking about what the standards of this society is. We do not
Who sets the standards?
People.
The people? In other words, the Constitution is set by the majority or the
That's
minority?
Right. By the majority.
No, it's by the minority. That's why it takes 2/3. You see, the Constitution and censorship are to protect the rights of the minority. The majority do not need a Constitution. This gets into allowing the Constitution to be governed by the majority, and therefore in certain places you could disallow whites or blacks or Jews or anybody else from teaching if you allow the majority to rule. And the whole concept behind democracy and the Constitution is to protect the rights of the minority, not the majority.